My name isn't really David Kessler, but it's close enough for you to remember, and far enough from the truth to keep me out of trouble. Spies aren't supposed to tell their real stories, not without redactions and a team of lawyers, but this one I can't keep to myself. See, people think spies are fiction. Martini-drinking, tuxedo-wearing shadows who always know which wire to cut and which door to kick down. Hollywood makes it look glamorous. Bulletproof Aston Martins, rooftop chases, a beautiful woman who always ends up on your side. But that's the illusion. The truth? We exist. And we don't vanish when the credits roll. We go home. We fall in love. We get married. And sometimes, the people we'd take a bullet for are the ones holding the gun. That afternoon, Battery Park was a postcard. Tourists snapping selfies with the Statue of Liberty in the distance. Ferries cutting white trails across the Hudson. The air carrying that briny tang of New York Harbor. I sat on a bench near the water, jacket collar turned up against the breeze, eyes scanning the crowd without really meaning to. Old habits don't die, they just get quieter. I was waiting for Sophie Adler. Intel specialist, freelance cryptographer, and the kind of person who could break a bank's firewall before you'd finished your morning coffee. She had something for me. Something that, according to the encrypted message she sent, could blow open a defense contracting scandal big enough to shake half of Washington. I should have been focused on that. But the thing about being a spy, or whatever they call us once we've traded government paychecks for private consulting, is that the job bleeds into the personal. You can't turn off suspicion. You read body language like headlines. And sometimes, you see things you wish you hadn't. I glanced left, just in time to spot a familiar figure stepping out of the back of a black Cadillac Escalade with diplomatic plates. Helena, my wife. Her hand wasn't empty. It was locked with someone else's. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair swept back like he'd just stepped out of a defense industry gala. Marcus Brandt, my old colleague, and my oldest enemy. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. That brief moment, her hand in his, the familiarity in their body language, told me more than 100 intercepted calls ever could. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't jump to my feet. Years of training kept me still. But inside, something shifted, quiet, sharp, irreversible. I'd faced insurgents with RPGs, operatives with knives pressed to my throat, and cybercriminals who could drain a billion-dollar account before breakfast. None of them had ever made me feel the way that glimpse of Helena's hand in his did. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about spies. We're still human. We still want someone waiting when we come home. Someone who knows the person under the aliases and the false passports. We still believe in loyalty. And when that's taken from us, it cuts deeper than any bullet. Sophie would be here in 3 minutes. I looked back toward the water, the wind tugging at my coat, and forced myself to breathe. This wasn't the place. Not yet. But the mission I thought I was on had just changed. And in my world, once the mission changes, there's no going back. In my world, betrayal rarely arrives with fireworks. It comes quietly, wrapped in the kind of details most people miss. The pause before a smile, the tilt of a head, the wrong kind of watch on the wrong kind of wrist. That's why, when I saw Helena's hand slip into Marcus Brandt's, I didn't just register it as a wife holding another man's hand. No, my mind broke it down into intel. The way her fingers curled around his like it was muscle memory, the slight lean of her body toward his, a lean I used to think was reserved for me in crowded rooms when she wanted to make sure her words found only my ear. Brandt looked exactly as I remembered him from the service, broad-shouldered, perfectly pressed, silver hair combed back with surgical precision. A Rolex Deep Sea glinted on his wrist, the same model he'd worn a decade ago in Kabul when he was still wearing the same flag on his shoulder as I was. Only now, that flag had been traded for contracts, offshore accounts, and allegiances you couldn't say out loud. They walked toward a black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb. The vehicle wasn't just transportation, it was a message. Diplomatic plates from a country with no official reason to be anywhere near New York's defense industry. The driver wore dark glasses despite the overcast sky. His shoulders were too squared, his posture too rigid for a man whose only job was to open doors. And behind them, 2 car lengths back, a second SUV waited. Same make, same tint, same purr of an upgraded engine. That was the shadow car, always there in case the first one needed to disappear in a hurry. As they reached the Escalade, Helena laughed. Not the polite, surface-level laugh she used at fundraisers. This was lower, warmer, the one I'd heard in our kitchen at midnight over coffee and bad jazz. I hadn't heard it in weeks. And hearing it now, for him, was like finding an old photograph of someone you loved, only they're smiling at someone else. Brandt touched her back lightly as she stepped inside, a move so casual anyone else would have missed it. I didn't. That was possession disguised as courtesy. The Escalade door shut with a muted thump, the kind that only comes from armored plating, and the convoy merged into traffic toward the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, disappearing into the artery that feeds the city's shadows. I didn't follow. Not because I didn't want to, but because instinct told me that if I moved too soon, I'd be playing into their hands. In this business, chasing without a plan is just volunteering for your own disappearance. Instead, I stayed on the bench, coffee cooling in my hand, eyes on the water. Battery Park's usual chaos, tourists lining up for the ferry, kids chasing pigeons, faded into background noise. The gulls overhead seemed to circle lower, like they sensed something coming. Somewhere in that shuffling crowd, Sophie Adler was on her way to meet me. She didn't know yet that my marriage had just collided head-on with an active intelligence op. She didn't know that Marcus Brandt's presence here meant her data wasn't just valuable, it was explosive. The saxophone player near the promenade slowed into a blues riff, too low and too smooth for the pulse climbing in my throat. The air felt thicker now, the kind of heaviness that precedes a summer storm. I replayed the image of Helena's hand in Brandt's over and over, cataloging the micro-expressions, the timing, the fact that neither of them even glanced over their shoulder. They either didn't see me, or they didn't care if I saw, and I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. 3 minutes later, Sophie appeared at the far end of the park, her pace steady, her eyes scanning in a way that told me she was already in the middle of her own storm. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. Whatever she was about to hand me was the second most dangerous secret in my life. And the first was leaving the city in a black Escalade. Sophie Adler didn't walk like most people. She didn't drift or meander. She moved as though every step had been mapped 2 days in advance. Even from a distance, I could see her scanning, noting faces, angles, possible approaches. I stayed seated, letting her close the distance. The park felt quieter as she neared, though the ferries were still blasting horns out on the Hudson. She eased down on the bench beside me without looking my way, eyes on the water, like we were 2 strangers killing time before separate appointments. "You're late," I said, my voice flat. In our world, greetings are just another way to gauge pulse and breathing. She didn't bite. Instead, she slipped something into my hand without breaking her gaze from the harbor, a small object wrapped in a MetroCard sleeve. I didn't have to open it to know it was a flash drive. The weight, or lack of it, was familiar. Sometimes the smallest things carry the most ruin. "They moved up the timeline," she murmured, voice low enough to be lost under the wind. "Offshore accounts, fake R&D facilities, invoices for equipment that doesn't exist. I've got names, dates, routing numbers, and something else." She hesitated then, and Sophie Adler wasn't the hesitating type. "What is it?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the spot where, moments ago, Helena had stood with Marcus Brandt. She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. The image was still fresh, burned into me like a classified stamp. "David," she said finally, "you need to understand, this isn't just about contracts. Brandt isn't working alone. He's got a civilian asset feeding him methods, access codes, movement patterns." She paused. "They're yours." The words hit harder than any ambush. Not just a betrayal of me, but of the systems I'd sworn to protect. And the source? My wife. My Helena. I've been shot at, cornered, even left behind once on the wrong side of a border. You learn to swallow fear, file it away until you can use it. But this wasn't fear. It was something colder. The kind of cold that settles in your bones and stays there. You're telling me, I said slowly, that Brandt's holding my playbook, and my wife handed it to him. Sophie didn't answer. She didn't have to. I turned my eyes back to the water. The Statue of Liberty stood out there, green and immovable, the perfect symbol for ideals that could be stolen piece by piece without anyone noticing, until the day you realized there was nothing left but the shell. Spies, soldiers, agents under deep cover. We all sign up knowing betrayal is part of the territory. You brace yourself for it from an enemy, maybe even from someone in your own chain of command. But from the person who's supposed to be your safe harbor? That's a different war entirely. This is everything, Sophie said, tapping the pocket where I'd stashed the drive. It's enough to pull the thread until the whole operation unravels. But now they know I have it. And they know you do, too. I thought of Helena again, her hand in Brandt's, the easy smile. And I realized Sophie was wrong about one thing. Brandt wasn't just after the drive. He was after me. And Helena had already drawn the map straight to my door. I stood, slipping the MetroCard sleeve deeper into my jacket. Then we'd better change the route, I said. Sophie rose too, matching my pace as we headed toward the park exit. Behind us, the harbor kept rolling, the ferries kept moving, and the gulls kept circling. But for me, something had shifted permanently. Because now it wasn't just about the mission. It was about the woman I loved helping the man I hated betray the country we all swore to defend. And there's no debriefing that can wash that kind of stain out of you. Central Park was pretending to be harmless that afternoon. Tourists clustered on Bow Bridge, holding their phones high to catch the skyline framed in autumn leaves. Rowboats drifted lazily across the lake, their passengers smiling like they'd stumbled into a movie set. From the outside, it was all linen tablecloths and laughter spilling from the low boathouse terrace. But to me, it felt like a chessboard. Every table, every pathway, every shadow a possible move or trap. Sophie sat across from me, her soda fizzing untouched, eyes darting between the waiter and the windows. I'd spread out a paper napkin between us, sketching a chain of shell companies, arrows leading from defense contractors to obscure LLCs registered in Caribbean islands. At the center was Brandt's name. Around it, a web of influence and money laundering that reached deeper than I'd expected. Look here, Sophie whispered, tapping one of the arrows. This account moved $6 million through a biomedical research grant. That lab doesn't exist. The address is a deli in Queens. I nodded. It fit Brandt's style perfectly. Hide the big crime inside something too ridiculous to question. We didn't stay long. Too much time in one spot draws attention. I dropped cash on the table, nodded toward the side exit. The crisp air outside felt good, clearing away the faint scent of wine and roast duck from the restaurant. That's when I saw them. Two men peeling off the path near Bethesda Terrace, moving with the kind of pace that says they're not late for a meeting. They're on a schedule to intercept. Both wore casual clothes that didn't match the weather, lightweight jackets, no scarves. The taller one had a subtle hitch in his right step. Old parachute injury, my mind cataloged automatically. Injuries tell you everything about how a man will fight. Keep walking, I murmured to Sophie, steering us toward the main path. The tourists were an asset, too many witnesses for open violence, but that only bought us seconds. The first man closed in from my left, hand dipping toward his waistband. I turned my body, catching his wrist with a practiced grip, twisting just enough to disrupt his momentum without drawing attention. To anyone watching, it might have looked like we'd accidentally bumped shoulders. To him, it was a reminder that bones can talk when pressure's applied in the right place. The second man cut through the crowd toward Sophie. I shoved my first opponent into a passing group of joggers and lunged forward, grabbing Sophie's elbow. Taxi, I said, the word sharp and low. We hit 72nd Street just as a yellow cab pulled up to drop off a couple. I yanked the door open, shoved Sophie inside, slid in after her. Drive, I told the cabbie. No destination, just motion. Only when we merged into traffic did Sophie notice the shift in my breathing. "What happened?" she asked. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. "They took it," I said. 2 words, heavy as lead. She looked at me sharply. "David, that means they know where you live." I shook my head slowly. "No, Sophie. They know where I really live." Going back to the apartment wasn't about safety. I knew it was compromised the second my phone left my pocket. But I needed to see Helena. Needed to read her eyes before she had time to build a new mask. Her eyes widened as she understood. The phone wasn't just a phone, it was a vault. Even encrypted, it held enough embedded data to map every safe house I'd built over the last 10 years. Apartments under fake names. Storage units full of contingency gear. Drop points where no one should ever be waiting. If Brandt's people could break the encryption, or worse, if Helena had already given them the keys, then every fallback location, every bolt hole, every hidden door I'd trusted was now burned. "They just turned my entire escape plan into a kill list," I said quietly. The cab rattled on through the park's east side. Somewhere behind us, the men from Bethesda Terrace were already reporting in. Somewhere else, Marcus Brandt was smiling, knowing the net wasn't just tightening, it was closing. And for the first time in years, I realized I had nowhere left to run that they couldn't follow. Home should feel safe. That's what they tell you when you're young, before you learn that 4 walls can hold just as much danger as any alley in Kabul. By the time I stepped out of the cab on West 81st, I knew the word home didn't mean what it used to. Not anymore. Not with my phone in enemy hands. The men from Bethesda Terrace hadn't just taken a device. They'd taken the blueprint of my survival. Every safe house I trusted. Every apartment under a fake name. Every bolt hole with gear for disappearing. Burned. And this apartment, the one Helena and I had shared for years, wasn't an exception. It was now just another marked location on Brandt's map. The building's brick facade looked warm in the fading light, the kind of postcard comfort realtors love to oversell. Inside, everything felt quieter than it should have been, like the air itself was holding its breath. Helena stood by the living room window, framed by the glow of Riverside Park. One hand cupped a mug, the other rested against the glass as if she were tracing the skyline. She turned at the sound of my key, smiling the kind of smile that plays well for photographs but tells you nothing about the truth underneath. "You're home early," she said. "Where were you?" My voice came out flat, the same tone I've used in interrogation rooms. Her brow furrowed just enough to be believable. "Interviews. That corruption piece I told you about." Everything in me said she was lying. Not because of the words. Those were perfect. But because I've spent my life watching people in their most dangerous moments. And right now, my wife's eyes weren't looking at me. They were measuring me. "With who?" I asked. She took a sip from her mug, gaze sliding past mine. "Sources. You know I can't tell you names." "Right?" I said, brushing past her toward the kitchen. I didn't need names. I'd already seen one, Marcus Brandt. We went through the motions of normal life. I set water to boil. She asked if I'd eaten. I told her I wasn't hungry. Silence pooled between us, heavy and deliberate. On the credenza sat a wedding photo from Santorini, her hair wild in the sea wind, my hand resting on her shoulder, both of us squinting against the sun. I stared at it, remembering a time when that touch meant something unshakable. Now it felt like an artifact from another life. She moved closer, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. "You're quiet tonight." I forced a small smile. "Long day." She nodded, holding my gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then disappeared toward the bedroom. When she was out of sight, I scanned the room with fresh eyes. A faint glint in the hallway mirror caught my attention. I stepped closer, tilting my head until I saw it. A tiny black dot on the frame. An audio bead. Fresh adhesive. Someone was listening. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Let them think I was unaware. In this game, sometimes the best move is to let your enemy believe they're ahead. If they wanted to listen, I'd give them something worth hearing, just not the truth. Sometimes the best lies are told in your own living room. But as I sat alone in the darkened living room, the truth settled in like fog rolling off the Hudson. This wasn't our home anymore. It was a stage, and every word, every glance, every touch was now part of an act. One of us pretending to be loyal, and the other pretending to believe it. The city changes at night. From the middle of Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan looked like a field of stars tethered to Earth. Beautiful, distant, untouchable. The wind coming off the Hudson was sharp, pushing against me as if the city itself was testing my resolve. Sophie was already there, leaning against the railing, her hands deep in the pockets of her dark coat. She looked like she'd been waiting a while, but her eyes were alert, scanning the walkway behind me before settling on my face. "You weren't followed," she said. Not a question. I made sure. The traffic below was a constant rush of headlights, the kind of white noise that made conversations feel smaller and more private than they were. I stepped up beside her, resting my hands on the cold steel rail. She didn't waste time. "It's Helena." I didn't react, at least not outwardly. "Go on." She passed him. "Brandt. Information only you could have given her. Codes. Patterns. Access points." Sophie's voice was calm, but there was a tension in it, like she knew she was pulling a pin and handing me the grenade. "She didn't just sell you out, David. She compromised every asset you've ever touched." The wind carried the words across the water and back again, like it wanted me to hear them twice. I thought of the look in Helena's eyes earlier that evening, the perfect balance of warmth and distance. The way her hand had fit into Brandt's without hesitation. I'd known betrayal before, but this was a fracture that ran through two loyalties at once, my marriage and my oath. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Career. Leverage. Maybe she thinks she's playing both sides. Maybe Brandt's promised her a clean record, new connections. Sophie shrugged. Whatever the reason, she's chosen her team. And it's not yours. For a long moment, I watched the city lights flicker in the water. In the reflection, my face looked older, harder. Most people think revenge is about anger, about striking back in the heat of the moment. They're wrong. The real thing, the kind that works, starts in the cold. It's measured, deliberate. The kind of plan you let grow in the dark until it's ready to be set loose. I didn't tell Sophie that part. Not yet. But standing there, with the wind cutting through my coat and the taste of salt in the air, I knew I wasn't going to settle for just stopping Brandt's operation. I was going to burn it down. And anyone standing too close, including Helena, would go with it. Sophie's voice pulled me back. "We can still move the data before they lock the city down. But we have to go tonight." I nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." But in my mind, the mission had already split in two. The first was about the flash drive. The second was about something far older, far more personal. And that one wouldn't end until Brandt and Helena understood what it meant to betray someone who knows every way to make you disappear. Red Hook at night feels like the edge of the city, the kind of place where Manhattan's lights don't quite reach and the wind carries the smell of rusted metal and diesel. We were cutting through the dim, empty streets near the docks, aiming for a side entrance Sophie trusted. The smell of brine and diesel was getting stronger, and the streetlights were thinning out, the kind of stretch where a tail could move in without anyone noticing. Warehouses squat along the docks like sleeping beasts, their broken windows staring out over the black water of the harbor. We never made it to the safe route Sophie had mapped. A black van cut us off 2 blocks from the river, side doors sliding open before the tires even stopped. 3 men inside, all business, gloved hands, silent faces. One of them held a suppressed pistol at his thigh, angled just enough to let me know it wasn't for show. Sophie tensed beside me, but I shook my head. Fighting here would end in a curbside cleanup crew. Sometimes survival means stepping into the trap, if only so you can see who's waiting on the other side. The ride was short, but long enough for me to memorize every face, every detail. The scuffed boots of the driver, the faint chemical smell on the man to my right. Cleaning solvent, industrial strength, probably used to wipe down surfaces in places you didn't want evidence left behind. When the van stopped, we were marched into a warehouse whose roofline I recognized. I'd seen it before through a long-lens scope on a surveillance op 5 years back. Back then, it had been an arms drop. Tonight, It was something else. Marcus Brandt stood under a single hanging bulb, his tailored coat immaculate despite the chill. And beside him, Helena. Her hair was loose, catching the light like she'd just stepped out of some photo shoot, not into the middle of a Black Ops handover. "David," Brandt said, his voice still carrying that smug, slow drawl I'd hated since the first day I met him. "You always were predictable." I didn't answer. I looked at Helena instead. She met my eyes for a heartbeat, just long enough for me to wonder if there was any hesitation there, then looked away. That was my answer. Brandt stepped closer. "She made the right choice, you know. We offered her a way out. You never did." There it was, the justification. The story he told himself so he could sleep at night. I'd heard 1,000 versions of it from 1,000 traitors. I kept my face unreadable, but inside, something settled into place. I wasn't here just to survive anymore. I was taking inventory of the guards, the exits, the rhythm of their movements. All things I could use later. Because the thing about walking into a trap is this: if you're patient enough and mean enough, sometimes the trap becomes yours. Brandt didn't know it yet, but tonight he'd given me exactly what I needed. Time inside his operation, a look at his security, and a reason to make my revenge not just personal, but perfect. The thing about Brandt's kind of warehouse is that it's never just a place to stash people. It's a theater. Every light, every shadow, every position is chosen for effect. He wanted me to feel surrounded. He wanted Sophie to feel helpless. And for a moment, he almost had both. For guards, 2 by the main entrance, 1 by the van, 1 near the steel stairs leading to the catwalk above. The man to my left, the one with the faint chemical smell, had the kind of stance that comes from too much gym time and not enough actual combat. That was my opening. Brandt was still talking, pacing slowly in front of me like he was delivering a lecture. I wasn't listening to the words. I was listening to the timing of the guard's steps, the soft metallic echo each time someone shifted their weight on the concrete. When the moment came, I moved. A sharp step into chemical smell space, left hand locking his wrist, twisting hard until the suppressed pistol clattered to the floor. My right elbow drove into his sternum, hard enough to knock the air out, not hard enough to drop him completely. You don't want your first move to be your last in a room like this. You want chaos. The nearest guard turned at the noise, gun half raised, and I was already moving through his line of sight. A push, a spin, and I sent the first man crashing into the second, both staggering toward the catwalk stairs. "Sophie now," I barked. She didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she bolted for the gap between the van and the loading bay, the flash drive clenched tight in her hand. One of the door guards reached for her, but she ducked low, sliding under his arm and vanishing into the dark beyond the bay doors. Brandt swore, an uncharacteristic crack in his composure, and lunged toward the van driver, barking orders. That was my cue to grab the pistol from the floor. Not to shoot. Not yet. Instead, I backed toward the center of the room, forcing the remaining guards to spread out. The more space between them, the harder it would be to pin me down. "Where do you think she's going, David?" Brandt called, regaining some of his swagger. I smiled faintly. "Somewhere you won't find her." That wasn't just a line, it was insurance. I'd seen the route Sophie took. She wasn't heading for the main road. She was cutting through the dry dock yards, the one stretch of Red Hook where even the NYPD hesitated to follow without backup. The first guard recovered enough to charge. I let him come, sidestepped at the last moment, and used his momentum to send him sprawling into a stack of shipping pallets. The crash was loud enough to mask my next move, a sprint toward the far corner where the shadow from a hanging tarp concealed the fire exit. I didn't make it all the way. Not yet. I wanted them to think I was retreating, not maneuvering. Because every second they spent chasing me in here was another second Sophie put between herself and Brandt's network. As I ducked behind the tarp, catching my breath, I caught a glimpse of Helena near the wall. She wasn't moving to stop me. She wasn't moving to help, either. She just watched, her expression unreadable. 2 guards closed in from opposite sides, pinning me before I could make the door. A knee to my ribs, a zip tie around my wrists, and the next thing I knew, I was being marched up the steel stairs toward the office I'd spotted earlier from the floor. It told me two things. She was deeper in this than I'd thought, and she still didn't understand what I was capable of when cornered. And that was fine, because the day she did understand would be the day my revenge came due. The upstairs office smelled of old paper and machine oil. A wide, grimy window looked out over the docks, the black water glinting faintly under scattered floodlights. Brandt was there, waiting. His coat was off now, sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms crisscrossed with pale scars. The pistol in his hand hung loose at his side, not aimed, not relaxed. Just there. "You've made a mess tonight," he said, his tone almost conversational. "The girl's gone, my men are scattered, and you're still breathing. You've always been hard to put down, David." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "Funny, I was about to say the same about you." He smirked, circling to keep the desk between us. "You think this is about old grudges? This is bigger than you, bigger than her. Helena understands that." "You mean she understands what you paid her to believe?" I said. "That betraying her husband is a career move instead of treason." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. Then it was gone. "You think she was happy playing house with a man who kept more secrets than the CIA? I gave her a way to matter." "You gave her a way to destroy everything I built," I said, my voice low. "You gave her a reason to look at me like I was the enemy." He laughed, short, sharp. "Maybe you are." I took a step closer. "No, Marcus. I'm the reckoning." The shift in his expression was subtle, but I'd seen it before, in men who suddenly realized the balance of power wasn't where they thought it was. He tightened his grip on the pistol, but I didn't move from mine. "You won't shoot me," he said. "Not here. Not now. You're too disciplined for that." He was right, sort of. I didn't plan to shoot him. Instead, I lunged forward, my hand catching the edge of the desk and using it as leverage to vault across. The surprise bought me the half-second I needed to slam into him, driving him back toward the window. The glass rattled but didn't break. Not yet. We grappled, his pistol scraping across the floor. His breath was hot against my ear, his voice strained. "You think this ends with me?" "It ends with whoever's left standing," I growled. I shifted my weight, using my shoulder like a battering ram. This time the window gave way, the safety glass shattering outward in a spray of tiny diamonds. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of salt and diesel from the docks below. For an instant, Brandt hung there, framed against the city lights. Then gravity took him. The sound when he hit the concrete was heavy and final, even from 2 stories up. No scream, just impact. Even from here, I could see the unnatural angle of his neck, the stillness in his chest. In the spy world, that's as close to a death certificate as you get. I stood at the broken window, chest heaving, staring down at the still form below. Somewhere in the shadows, Helena would hear about this before the hour was out, and she'd know I was coming. Because tonight wasn't the end. It was the opening move in something far bigger. 2 nights after Brandt's fall, Helena vanished from every address I could track. Credit cards dead. Phone off. No flight records. No trace on the usual border crossings. She was running, but not like an amateur. Someone had given her a plan. Probably Brandt, before he hit the concrete. I didn't chase. Not yet. People like Helena think vanishing is about speed. It's not. It's about time. You give them just enough rope to feel safe, to believe they're invisible. And then you pull. The pull began with the accounts. Offshore shells that she thought were untouchable started bleeding funds in tiny, precise amounts. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough that by the time she noticed, the numbers didn't add up. Then came the network. Every safe contact she thought she had started to vanish, arrested, exposed, or simply walking away after their own secrets became liabilities. Calls went unanswered. Messages bounced back. She was alone, and she didn't even know yet who was taking her world apart. I watched it all from a distance, never stepping into her line of sight. Not until the night she booked a room under a fake name at a riverside motel in Jersey, the kind of place you pay for in cash. I never chased her shadow. Instead, I followed the money, the quiet bleeding of her offshore accounts I'd started weeks ago. When one of those withdrawals pinged near Jersey, I knew she'd surface close by. Motels like this are magnets for the desperate. I was already in the room when she arrived. She froze in the doorway, the keycard still in her hand. "David, don't." My voice cut through the stale air like a wire. "We're past the part where words matter." Her eyes darted, calculating exits. I shook my head. "You won't find one." She tried the defiant angle. "You think you can scare me into. This isn't about scaring you." I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "It's about taking back what you stole, piece by piece, the way you took it from me." On the table between us, I set down a slim laptop. The screen lit with rows of numbers, her accounts, every cent she'd hidden, every asset tied to her new life. All of it draining in real time into an untraceable black channel. She stared, her mask finally cracking. "Where?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "You're going to walk out of here with nothing. No money, no allies, no name anyone will touch. And when you try to rebuild, I'll be there, taking it apart again." Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Why not just kill me?" I let the question hang in the air. Then I leaned in close enough for her to see exactly how calm I was. Because dead is easy. Living without power, without trust, that's a slow burn. And you deserve to feel every second of it. I walked past her, the echo of my steps filling the small room. Outside, the Hudson shimmered with the lights of Manhattan, indifferent to the war playing out in its shadows. By the time I reached the city, Helena would already be realizing the full scope of what I'd done. The account's gone. The identity's erased. The world she'd traded me for reduced to dust. And she'd know the truth. Spies don't just fight wars for their country. Sometimes, they fight wars for themselves. And when they do, there's no treaty, no ceasefire, only the long game.